Written by Murphy here. I'm doing a book review of Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly, by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is in the series of Immigrant's Guide to American Literature. American literature. This was a big one. This had a huge influence on the history of America. This is a novel, a sentimental novel published in 1852. It's written by an abolitionist, and it was in fact first serialized in a magazine, an abolitionist magazine, so everybody knew that's what it was about. Serialized stories, serialized novels were common. That's how Dickens did most of his novels. So this is America. They were doing the same thing, serializing this sentimental novel. And it was originally in a abolitionist magazine, so everybody knew that's what it was about, and it became a book. It was published, like I said, in 1852 and had a huge effect on America. There is a story, probably not true, but it's a good story, that when Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, he said, "This is the little lady who wrote the book that started the war." 1852 is before the Civil War started, but this book really affected people's opinions about the issue. So I'm going to talk more about the book itself, the text of the book. This is a sentimental novel, which means it's what now would be called melodramatic. It is really intended to pull people's heartstrings. And it's not realistic. People know that this is not real. It's heightened, right? It's larger than life. So the story begins with the slave owner, Mr. Shelby, meeting with a slave trader to take care in order to sell some slaves to get money to pay his speculation debts. He was investing in things that didn't work out. So he needed to make the money back. And he is telling this slave trader about Tom, an amazing slave that's going to be super valuable. Of course, he's trying to sell this valuable property, this slave, up and get good money for the slave. Tom, as we are introduced to him by this owner, Mr. Shelby, his owner, said that Tom is so amazing. Tom runs the farm. Tom was so trustworthy. He was sent to a free state to get $500 for me, and he came back. Wow, what a very trustworthy character. Unbelievably trustworthy, right? But according to the story, that's what he did, and he was going to get sold to cover the debts. The slave trader says, "Well, I can't give you all the money you want, but you need to throw in this child that happened to come in and was playing with the master, and throw that kid in too, and that'll cover all the amount that you need." The guy's like, "Okay, I hate to do it, but all right." That's the beginning of meeting Tom. This set into motion a lot of what the plot was about. The woman, who is the mother of this child who's about to get sold, she had just heard that her husband, who is a slave on a different property, is about to run away because he is being forced by his master. He, George, was extremely smart and clever, and his master was jealous. So his master made him have to. He said, "I don't want you to be married to this woman on this other by my neighbor. I want you to marry who I want you to marry." And this person, George, felt so strongly that he did not want to abandon his wife and children, that he was going to run away to Canada, and that night, so he didn't have to be married to another woman and save money to buy his wife, the freedom of his wife and children. Well, then later on, the mother, so he's going to go, and she's like, oh, okay. And this woman hears that her son is going to be sold, and she's like, I too need to run away. So they independently run away. And this, we throughout the course of this book, find out about their adventures and misadventures. And Tom, although he's the name of the book, he wasn't even, I mean, he was one of the many main characters. There was a lot going on. A lot of drama, a lot of larger than life activity. It was a good story. It was well told. There was a lot of action. What's going to happen? Narrow escapes, and oh, they're safe now. Oh, but no, they're not. So all this action. And the woman, the author, Harriet Beecher Stowe, did a good job of making these characters feel real. Even though they are not, like I said, they're larger than life. No, it's ridiculous that Tom is introduced as someone who would not take his freedom when he had $500 in his pocket and could do so. What? That's ridiculous. But Tom is an incredibly moral character. He also is extremely strongly Christian. He is shown as having kind of a little church of his own. He knows how to read. He has his Bible, and he truly, truly, sternly believes this. Just strongly believes this. He gave up his life for it in the end. Christianity is definitely one of the sentiments that is pulled on the Sentimental novel. She wrote a good book. Sentimental novels are also kind of carried forward now. I would say Toni Morrison's novels are sentimental. I have to sneeze. The Water Dancer, Ta-Nehisi Coates, that book is also sentimental. Both of Morrison's and Ta-Nehisi Coates, those books kind of have this magical aspect to it, which is sort of the progression. Now it's gone to, well, it can't just be sentimental, it also have magical, but this is not that yet. Here in Tom's world, it's very sentimental, very moral. So as we read the stories of what's happening, we can place ourselves in their shoes. We can say, oh, if this were happening to me, if my child were being taken away, I too would probably make a run for it, even if it cost me my life. And the audience of this book, which was mostly Northerners, because that was where the audience of abolitionists were, right? They may not have thought about what it was like. So here they are seeing, what would I do in this situation? There was a lot in the story about family. Oh my goodness. The reason Eliza, the woman who ran with her child, left is because she ran away. It's because to protect her child. The very admirable, intelligent man, George, ran away rather than have to submit to being married to a different woman. He's like, this is not in my honor. I'm not going to do this. So this is family. And there was a lot about the children. What would the children do? Oh my gosh. Later on in the story, Tom actually gets sold to a pretty good new house. He's like, all right, I'm going to go here and I'm going to be a good Christian person and obey the laws of the land. There is a woman, that slave owner was a nice guy. He was kind of a dilettante. He was not, a little bit lazy and, and his wife was the very big example of a selfish woman. However, they had a child. And there's lots of romantic, sentimental stories around the rest of this, right? But they have a child, little Eva. Eva was way better than life. No child would be that good. She was so good. And of course, spoiler alert, she dies. And that sets into motion a few other things. So these incredibly sticky, treacly characters, they're part of this story. That's what it's about. You know, we're heightening the drama, the sentimentality, pulling on the emotions. And every step of the way, something gets in the way, and something. So Eva dies. Possibly it could have been stopped, maybe not. There are stories of people, slaves along the journey, that in the very end, Tom is sold again to a horrible master. And he is trying to convert some of the slaves, like, you should understand that Jesus is better, and, you know, there's a better way to live, and you have to be responsible for your own soul. One of the women is describing to one of the slaves is describing to him her life, and it includes her choosing to kill her own child rather than let this child be in slavery. There's another earlier time when a woman realizes she's going to be separated from her family, a slave woman, and she jumps off a ship and drowns herself. Very dramatic, very sad. Big appeal to family ties, appeal to love, to children, to Christianity, being your better self. She does have a part where the second nice master to Tom, the nice owner, talks about how he doesn't like slavery at all. He has inherited slaves, and he's in this circumstance. So even though it's sentimental, they bring in some logical, reasoned arguments. They're trying to also discuss what could be done. He describes that slavery is terrible. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't even help the masters. He's like, it's destroying me. It's destroying us. But I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do about this. This was a discussion. Believe me, it was a discussion in the abolitionist magazine that it appeared in. What is the solution? The story itself, as it goes on, you follow up with the George and his wife. They escape, and they end up going to Africa. This is one of the solutions that was entertained at the time of, well, the slaves were taken unwillingly from their home in Africa. Maybe they would prefer to go back to Africa. So that is what happened to the heroic figures of freed slaves in Uncle Tom's Cabin. They did end up going to Africa, and they were trying to take their high moral character and their education and assist other people in Africa. So that is how this story ends up. And that's just what happened in the time. Okay. This story is incredibly radical for its time because it is really the first novel who takes these slaves as the heroes of the novel. They were noble and of high character, people that the readers could admire. There were stories, true stories of slaves. Frederick Douglass, of course, has a marvelous story. But this was not an individual. This was a whole cast of characters going through their slave life. Harriet Beecher Stowe was inspired by reading a lot of the slave narratives. And I believe she also helped with freed slaves as well. So this was a big deal that she recognized and wrote down in truly beautiful and engaging prose the story in a, I quote, it was like realistic, but it very dramatic, right? This is not, people don't behave that way. This isn't realistic, but it's more true to life. This is like making them a recognizable human person, not a subhuman, not really a high race. Right. Now, when it was published, they did a print run of the novel. There were 300, and there was some problem with the publisher, so they only printed 300,000. That's a lot of books. So they only printed 300,000. There were pirated copies all over the place too. It was extremely popular in England, so it was like 1.5 million, they estimate, that were pirated. There were probably pirated copies in America too, and they were totally passed around. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone felt very sad for Tom himself, who was an extraordinary human being, incredibly moral, self-sacrificial, fantastic. So people were looking at this and going, the treatment of human beings who in this story they could recognize as worthy human beings cannot be tolerated. So this was finally a story that people could hang their hearts on. And it did influence what happened next. Now, it had a half-life. There is a insult for someone, a black person, to be called Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom was incredibly self-sacrificial and submissive to his masters. So I'm not a black person. This is what I understand. It is that a black person who is like submissive and like sucks up to white people would be called Uncle Tom, because that is what Uncle Tom did. Now, so it's like got this insulting, when a person, even at the time that it was published, some of the black people in America who were thought leaders thought that it was not well, didn't represent black people well, didn't represent slaves well. I don't remember the name of who brought it up to Frederick Douglass, but Frederick Douglass said, sure, but it's doing a lot more good than harm, is how Frederick Douglass looked at it. The thing about it is, these people in the book, none of them were realistic. Maybe the New England cousin that came to help take care of Eva was the most realistic person, because she was practical, and also the one that the readers who were Northerners would most identify with, I think. She was realistic, but pretty much every single other person was a heightened caricature of a human being. Uncle Tom was definitely a heightened caricature of the massively self-sacrificing slave. And Christian, very Christian he was basically a Christian martyr. So to criticize him alone, you'd have to criticize all of the characters in the book. But it's valid. He's unrealistically submissive. And the the different characters in the book are it's kind of the first time some of these slave type types of characters and slaves were written down and illustrated, like for art. So it could feel very painful and objectionable to see some of them written down. That's not what people are like. And people could say that's not what Black people are like. And yet these stereotypes got codified and could persist in a painful way. The things that happened were things that happened to slaves. So this is a painful story. It's a dark part of history, and it was asking America to change. The last few chapters, actually all throughout, but the last few chapters in particular are extremely direct, saying Black people are humans that deserve respect. They are worthy, moral human beings. I would say that it doesn't even require being human beings is the end of being the question of being worthy. But in this story, she describes it. She's hitting it really hard. End slavery. We need to stop this. And in fact, all of America rose up to settle that question. It was a revolutionary book for its time. There is a lot of reason to discuss or disagree. People could disagree with a lot of the things that she wrote down, as they should. Think about it. Everyone should discuss. Talk about what happened. This is an incredibly significant book internationally. Oh, that's the other big deal. Everybody keeps saying it was the most read book of that time, second only to the Bible. So everybody was reading this book. Everybody was touched by it. And pretty soon after that, America ripped itself in two to end slavery. Uncle Tom's Cabin had an enormous effect on America then. It continues to have it now. It is an interesting book. It's well written. It's very dramatic. And it is not 100% realistic. It's a heightened drama. It's worth reading. It's very long, though. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear what you think. Let's continue the conversation.